Good day everyone and welcome back to our literature class. My name is Percy and today we are going to continue our topic, which is magical realism. Our goal today is to be able to look into two of the short stories of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, a Colombian writer, and we will see what magical realism is in these two pieces of short stories. Magical realism is a genre of literature that depicts the real world as having an undercurrent of magic or fantasy. Magical realism is still categorized under realistic genre, not magical. Okay, although there is a merging of the elements of fantasy or magic together with reality, magical realism is not a fantasy genre. Magical realism is a part of the realism genre of fiction, just like what we said, and it's also important for us to understand that within a work of magical realism, the world is still grounded in the real world, not a world far away from reality, not a different world or a universal or an intergalactic setting, but it is still grounded on the real world. Now, it's important for us to understand what was happening in Colombia during the time these two short stories were written. First, Colombia. The official name of Colombia is the Republic of Colombia and is derived from the last name of the explorer Christopher Columbus. Now, do not be confused with the American state Colombia. That's different. It's Colombia, not Colombia. What we're talking about today is the Latin American country. Of course, we know international sensation Shakira is, from Colombia. She was born and raised in Barranquilla, a city located on the northern Caribbean coast of Colombia. Okay, so Shakira is one of those popular icons from Colombia. Now, other than some of the things that we celebrate from Colombia, such as the so many records on beauty pageants and of course some successes as well in terms of Miss Universe and other pageants. Okay, we also have some of the not so good things happening from Colombia. One of which is of course Medellin, the murder city, quote unquote. This was once called the murder city of the world with 17 murders every day in 1991. Though in 2013, the city was nominated for the most innovative city in the world. Now, another popular figure from Colombia was Pablo Escobar. If you have heard the name Pablo Escobar, probably you are aware of some of the international news when it comes to drugs. The Medellin cartel, Spanish Cartel de Medellin, was a powerful and highly organized Colombian drug cartel and terrorist-type criminal organization originating in the city of Medellin that was founded and led by Pablo Escobar. Okay, so probably you heard of him, and we also know that by record, Colombia is known for its export of drugs and syndicates. Another thing that we can take note of is Colombia's high regard for the elderlies. Age is valued in Colombia. The older a person is, the more powerful their voice becomes. Elders are deeply respected throughout the entire country of Colombia. So, kind of similar with what or how we treat our elderlies in the Philippines. Now, let us proceed to the discussion of the very first short story, which is A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Who is Gabriel Garcia Marquez? He was born in 1928 in Aracatuba, Colombia, and he was also awarded as the Nobel Prize winner in literature in 1982. Now, the characters in the story are the following: the old man, Pelayo, Elisenda, there's the child, Father Gonzaga, a neighboring woman, and the Spider Girl. Okay, very interesting set of characters. We have a Spider Girl, okay, and we have a very old man with an enormous wings. By the way, in the title, it is also interesting that the author said this is a children's tale or a story for kids. And we will find out later on if that particular subtitle is fitting the genre of this short story. Is this really a children's story? Let us try to recall the 5 elements of magical realism that we talked about previously, one of which is realistic setting. The next one is magical elements, unique plot structure, limited information, and of course a critique. Now, I want us to go through these 5 elements of magical realism and see where the parts or the details of the short story, A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings, would actually fit. First of all is the realistic setting. If you go back to the story, all magical realism novels takes place in a setting in this world that's familiar to the reader. The next is a magical element. Pelayo finds him lying in the mud of his courtyard. Caged in a chicken coop, people from all over the world come to see him. His one supernatural quality, aside from his wings, seems to be his patience, and he speaks in a dialect that no one understands. Another magical element in the story is the spider in a carnival. The spider is a carnival attraction. She used to be a young girl, but one night snuck out of her house to a dance. On the way home, a lightning bolt of brimstone turned her into a giant tarantula. Her only source of food is the meatballs that the spectators are throwing towards her. Okay, so imagine that, a character who turned to a giant tarantula. Now, the next element is the unique plot structure. The old man brings hundreds of pilgrims who don't mind paying Pelayo and Elisenda a small fee for the privilege of seeing him. The proceeds bring Pelayo and Elisenda a new house, a new business, and more money than they know how to spend. So in a way, you would see that Pelayo and Elisenda took advantage of the opportunity to earn money. Now, one more thing about the unique plot structure. The old man's reputation wanes when he proves capable of performing only minor consolation miracles. Instead, the spectators flock to the Spider Woman, who tells a heart-wrenching story with clear, easy-to-digest lesson in morality that contrasts sharply with the obscurity of the old man's existence and purpose. Although no less strange than the winged old man, the Spider Woman is easier to understand and even pity. So these people lost their interest and started to look for another attraction, which is now in the story of the girl who turned to be a spider. Now, just like what we said, one of the elements of magical realism is its limited information. So that means the author would try to present something that is bordering magical or fantastic and realistic, but will not explain all the details. So it will be left for readers and critics like us to try to figure out why these things were presented in the story, such as this one. By the time the old man finally flies into the sunset, Elisenda, for all her fusing, sees him go with a twinge of regret. And it is the old man's extreme patience with the villagers that ultimately transforms Pelayo's and Elisenda's life. So there's that influence when it comes to how the old man changed the life of that family. Okay, from being so poor and impoverished and having a sick child to becoming, kind of well off in terms of what happened in their life. Okay, they profited from the tourist attraction, and the rest is history. There's that allusion, according to him, to a biblical scripture which is found in Hebrews chapter 13 verse 2. He quoted the scripture, "Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it." And that's basically one of the main points of the story. Gabriel Garcia Marquez used that biblical analogy in terms of welcoming or being hospitable to angels, quote unquote, okay, in the guise of the very old man. Now, it leads us to the last element of magical realism, which is criticism. The question here is now, who is the old man? Who is the old man? And what does he allude to? What is Marquez trying to communicate in this short story? Now, to give us an understanding of this one, I want us to quickly look at this portion of history. It is called La Violencia, or the violence. It's like a decade long of civil unrest and crisis happening during the time the story was written. It took place between the military forces of Colombia and the National Police of Colombia, supported by Colombian Conservative Party, parliamentary groups on one side, and self-defense and guerrilla groups aligned with the Colombian Liberal Party. and the Colombian Communist Party on the other side. The conflict caused millions of people to abandon their homes and property. Media and news service failed to cover events accurately for fear of revenge attacks. The lack of public order and civil authority prevented victims from laying charges against perpetrators. Documented evidence from these years is rare and fragmented. The majority of the population at the time was Catholic. During the conflict, there were press reports that Catholic Church authorities supported the Conservative Party. Several priests were accused of openly encouraging the murder of the political opposition during Mass, including the Bishop Miguel Angel Builes. Okay, so look at this historical underpinning in the story. There's that civil unrest. This political climate has led to the struggle of the people in Colombia, and it is reflected on the kind of characters and plot structure this story presented to all of us. In the story, Pelayo and Elisenda took advantage of whatever they can for them to be able to better their lives in the same manner that all of these things happening in Colombia back then, the poverty, all of the unrest that they are experiencing, the lack of peace, and of course the mistrust probably towards the people of the church, because now the people of the church are becoming part of some of the oppositions in politics. So all of this chaos happening are reflected in the lives of the characters. The very old man probably would allude to the Savior, okay, because of that 3 days. Okay, that's very symbolic, no? In biblical studies, you know that 3 days symbolizes the life, death, and resurrection of the Christ. And the welcoming of the old man is not the kind of hospitality that is pure, let's say. Okay, they did not welcome the very old man with enormous wings because he needs welcoming, because he needs company, but because of another motive, and that is probably to earn money, that is to profit from this creature. Similarly, the criticism there is that ill-mannered religious people, or the hypocrites, are using the name of God to earn money, okay, the name of spirituality and religion to be able to profit. And of course, they would look for a good cause and use religion and spirituality to be able to lure people and probably attend to their spiritual needs, if you may. But little did we know that there's an ulterior motive behind it. Okay, that these are some of the evil things happening in the name of religion. Now, again, I want to put some disclaimer on our discussion today. This is not to just generalize everything or attack, but what we're saying is that Gabriel Garcia Marquez is putting it in our eyes that these things are happening. Maybe not in an ideal world, but in their context, it's happening. Try to think of that. They are one of the most religious countries, but it's also one of the most chaotic one. All of these drugs, all of these crimes, just like what we mentioned a while ago, all of this civil unrest and struggle of people, the poverty, and of course the lack of peace. All of these things are present in the midst of them being religious, in the midst of them being spiritual, quote unquote. That's kind of ironic, and that's basically the kind of criticism that Gabriel Garcia Marquez is presenting to the readers. Interesting enough, once the people or the people in the community back then lost interest with the story of the old man, they transferred to another center of attraction, which is the Spider Girl. And that's basically how we sometimes, religious people, maybe us religious people, are also doing or experiencing. We started very passionate, diba? Very interested with our faith, but along the way we lose sight and interest of it and look for something else. Okay, look for something that would entertain us, look for something that would probably fill the void that religion will not be able to fill anymore, because we already lost interest and we do not pay attention to it anymore. Now, that is also similar in a way to the next story of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, which is a shorter one, The Handsomest Drowned Man in the World. Now, there's kind of similarity when it comes to these two characters, the very old man and the handsome man, okay, being found in an ordinary setting. So talking about one of the elements of magical realism, the realistic setting. The story opened with children playing in the shore, and in a normal day, they saw a drowned man. The children played with the drowned man's body all afternoon until the fishermen took notice of the handsome man, of the handsomest drowned man. The man is called handsomest. Okay, so it's like a superlative of handsome. Okay, it's not very handsome, it's the handsomest drowned man. Okay, there's that play in English. So it kind of communicate that words are not enough to capture the grandeur and the majestic presence of the man. What are some of the magical elements there? Of course, there was that huge, enormous funeral that was made for the non-decaying body of the man. Interesting enough, the man is not decaying. It's probably dead, but it's not decaying. The body is still perfect and still composed. Okay, so right now you're able to probably see the connection again in terms of spiritual belief and religiosity when it comes to the personification of the handsomest drowned man. It's not decaying. That's a very magical element, but it's blended in reality. Later that night, women took care of the drowned man. Not only was he the tallest, strongest, most virile, and best-built man they had ever seen, but even though they were looking at him, there was no room for him in their imagination. So it's something beyond, or someone beyond their imagination. They have not seen a kind of creature as majestic, as handsome as this handsomest drowned man. Men, women, and children all gathered together to worship and adore the dead body. Although the man has not done anything significant, the villagers all had an experience of him. Okay, so they don't have any connection, any relationship with the handsomest drowned man, but just by experiencing the presence of the man made an impact already in the individual lives of the people in that community. Very religious, right? Very spiritual in terms of its undertone. Now, an interesting part of the story is that the man was named Esteban, or Esteban, in the story. Esteban is actually an intertextual character to an African legend who traveled the whole world on his own. Okay, so the kind of physical strength and perseverance that Esteban in the legend, in that African legend, espouses was actually attributed to the handsomest drowned man. So they labeled or called the man Esteban. According to the story, the villagers went to the nearby communities, nearby islands, and nobody would claim the man. They don't know the person, basically, but they adore him and worship the dead body. Interesting, right? How do we connect this one to the very old man with enormous wings? The Pope visited Colombia in the same year the story A Handsomest Drowned Man was actually written. A new political party arose after the visitation of the Pope, and Colombia remained under poverty, drugs, and violence. Despite the visitation of the Pope to uplift the condition of the people, religiously speaking, they remained under extreme poverty. They remained under the influence of crime and drugs and all of these nasty things happening in Colombia. So it has been a chain of problems from decades before until at the point the story was written. Nothing has changed. That handsomest drowned man was actually a nobody. It's like a dead person, a corpse, a body that was just, that just arrived in their island without information, without origin, but they worship the man. And Gabriel Garcia Marquez is probably using that as a criticism to this quote-unquote dead religion. When the colonizers came, they introduced a God who died for them, a dead God who they did not encounter personally. But according to them, the presence of that dead person changed their lives forever. See the kind of blind religious fanaticism present in the story. That alludes to probably the people back then in Colombia, and maybe not just in Colombia, but even in general. All religious people are guilty of that, according to Gabriel Garcia Marquez, in an extended interpretation, that religion has the power to blind us. We remain under the influence of crime and drugs and all of these political issues and corruption. And similarly, in our country, probably the tone is the same. The more religious we are, okay, that's very hypocritical, sorry for the statement, but we are known as one of the most religious countries. And in the same manner, we are part of the top something in terms of the most corrupt countries in the world. These things are blinding us from reality, from the expectation that we should be beyond all of these problems because we have a powerful religion, a powerful God who would change us from within, who will make us better people. But that's not what's happening. Again, just a disclaimer, this is not in any way my personal statement when it comes to religion. I have my personal faith as well. I believe in God. But at the same time, I want us to be critics here. I want us to open our eyes and see the reality of the world. That's the purpose of literature and philosophy. For us not just to be, blinded, but for us to see what's happening in the lens of characters and plot structures. So I hope that as we recall the story of The Very Old Man with Enormous Wings and The Handsomest Drowned Man in the World by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, I hope that we will not just be able to understand magical realism, but we will also take a look at the condition of our society, the condition of our civilization, and how we can better it. That is the power of literature. That is the power of surfacing all of these problems in a form of stories. So that's it for today. I hope you learned something. So for your assignment, for your next story, which will be part of your critical paper, if you are part of my class, if you're listening to this recording and you are under my contemporary literature class, your third paper is magical realism. And you will be reading Salman Rushdie's The Perforated Sheet. Okay, this is a story from India and it has a lot of magical realism elements as well. So what I want you to do for that paper is just like what we did in this two short story, identify the 5 elements of magical realism, pinpoint where the story is in terms of these elements, and try to take a look at what is the hidden message. What do you think was the author trying to point out in terms of criticism, in terms of the limited information that he is presenting? As readers of literature and literary critics, I want us to use this as a springboard for us to be able to see the condition of society back then when the story was written through the lens of magical realism. Again, thank you for joining me today and I will be seeing you in our next lesson. Salamat po. Happy reading.